Jim has begun to believe he is in love with a woman he has never met. The government convinced him that this was the way, you see. They could no longer go outside, they weren't welcome there. Outside was reserved for something human beings had outgrown. Fear convinced them that they could no longer go outside. The off chance that it all was in fact real convinced them that they could no longer go outside. The virus, the smog, the fires, the grenades. So Jim stays home and dives into the pool of blue light on his phone, away from outside, curling inward. Jim lives in Portland, Oregon. The woman he's in love with, whom he has never met in person, Mindy, lives in Louisville, Kentucky. They met over the phone, of course. Jim is now obsessed with his phone. He stares at it day and night. As soon as he wakes up in the morning, he looks at his phone, and when he goes to bed, his phone. Jim doesn't eat. He only thinks about Mindy. She sends him pictures. He's spoken to her very briefly on the phone once or twice, but this he doesn't like, nor does she. They're both shy people. Jim doesn't really leave his house. He used to watch television, mainly the news, but one day he realized that there was no difference between liberal or conservative media. Conservatives wanted his head on a stick. Liberals wanted his balls in a vice. So Jim just sat there, listening to the rain, staring at his phone, not eating, merely drinking glasses of water and thinking about Mindy. The only time he was allowed to leave his house was when he would go to the Forever 21 women's clothing store and buy panties for Mindy that he would put in his mailbox to be sent to her. She would then proceed to send him photos in the panties. They did this once or twice, but the Forever 21 store soon became off limits, and it also made Jim exceedingly uncomfortable and sweaty, so he stopped. He didn't tell Mindy he stopped. She got the drift. He just stopped. Jim wasn't opposed to the police. He didn't particularly like the police, but he wasn't opposed to them. Jim used to like to shoot guns, but he jammed his thumb in a 12 gauge over under one time and bled a lot and said he was sick of it. He would never shoot a gun again. After all, he didn't like the recoil of the big 12 gauge. Jim really only lived to stare at his phone and wait for Mindy. Sometimes Mindy would not send him a message. He usually tried to play that cool, but sometimes he couldn't, of course. He would send her a barrage, and then she would answer sometimes that she was in the shower, sometimes she had fallen asleep. Who knows if she was lying? Jim didn't care as long as he heard from her. Mindy was really something else. I mean, long red hair, tattoos of elephants on her back, freckled nose, Zoftig, just about perfect in Jim's eyes. He posited the question many times about whether or not he would change something about Mindy that would make him like her more, and by God, he just could not think of anything. So he stared and stared and stared at his phone. He would pick it up often and look at it. He would put his phone on silent. He would put it on ring. Sometimes when he put it on ring, he would imagine he heard a message come in. He would pick up the phone, flick it on, look at it, but nothing was there. Jim suspected that maybe he was obsessed with his phone, some disorder. But he shrugged that off. The only reason he looked at his phone so much was because he loved Mindy. Jim and Mindy did do all kinds of things in their messages and on the phone. They talked dirty, sent naughty photos, played out fantasies. One time they even had phone sex. Jim sitting on the toilet, moaning into his phone, touching himself. God knows what Mindy was doing, but she was moaning too. Then they would grow tired and hang up. This correspondence stretched on in this exact fashion for about 10 years, never meeting, sharing daily anecdotes, naked photos, bad phone sex, career advice, old family recipes. Then one morning, something happened. Jim woke and turned on his phone. He usually had a message from Mindy waiting for him in the morning because of the time difference. She always sent the sweetest good morning messages. Sometimes Jim would wake up to a naked photo of Mindy in the morning, which is his particular favorite. Sleeping actually became one of Jim's absolute favorite things to do because of this reason. But there was no message this morning. Jim scrolled over to his Instagram page. He went to Mindy's page then. He was standing in his kitchen. He nearly dropped dead in his kitchen right then and there. There was a man in a photo with Mindy, a man Jim had never seen. Jim broke out into a cold sweat. His heart became violent. His breathing retreated back. He walked outside, oblivious to the torrents of Oregon rain falling down and the protocol. He sent Mindy a machine gun of messages. He heard nothing back. He called her over and over again. Nothing. He did this for days. He didn't sleep for days, except when his eyes just could not handle staring into the phone any longer, until he was glazed over with a blue sheen, and he essentially fainted into a slumber. Nothing. Mindy was evaporated. Jim fell into the darkest depression of his life. He started smoking pot. And he bought some bad street dope and developed pancreatitis. Jim started seeing a therapist who told him he was an alcoholic. Jim said he never really drank in his life, but he believed the therapist anyway. Jim thought about showing up at Mindy's house. Somehow, some way, he'd get there. He had her address. But you see, Jim was not psychotic. Jim was not criminal. He couldn't do that. That seemed just irredeemably sick. So he sat there smoking weed for years, another 10 years, wondering what happened to Mindy. Mindy never posted any other photo. A ghost. Just that one photo with a mysterious man with a green heart emoji below it, smiling. That was it. Jim crumbled. He stared at his phone for the rest of his life, wondering if he should have just let the street dope take him. Stared at his phone forever and ever, until one day he was embalmed in a box. That's all we got.
Okay.
Oh, love in the millennium, in the new millennium.
Yeah, don't be a millennial.